Now, if we may have our next speaker, Nasima Islam, who will be talking on is Critique or Critic Complicit, Emergence of an Anti-Minor, Necropolitics in Contemporary India. Over to you, Nasima.
Thank you so much. Because we are running short of time, I'll go directly into the heart of my presentation. But before that, I sincerely thank PSCGS for providing me this particular platform to talk to you all. So, spoiler alert, I'm not talking about some really very critically thick theory or concept. My two arguments that I am talking about throughout my slides are like this. One, is something rotten in the state of Bharat? And two, if so, then how is the critique responding to this Indian scenario? That's it. So even if now I am stopped, you understand what I was going to talk about. Okay. So, but before going into my slides, I would like to read out this particular piece that I have written. It's a 500-word thing. Because I want to clarify what is my ethical, intellectual motivation behind this particular presentation. Okay. To be honest, let me put this disclaimer that this paper is a work in progress, and I know I have a lot of ground to cover, especially because I am taking help of a lot of critical philosophical formulations by so many thinkers. Therefore, I definitely do not have the audacity to kind of claim that I have mastered all their theorizations. Pragmatically speaking, I have just limited myself to only the concepts that were relevant to my particular purpose of today. Now, as some of you already know, my broader research concerns what we may call the Muslim question in contemporary India. And this question holds renewed interest, particularly at this critical juncture in history in the context of Israel-Palestine conflict, if we can call it conflict at all. You know what is happening. It's anything but a conflict. Anyway, so for the purpose of my research, I have been reading a lot of interlocutors and trying to understand how the Muslim question is being addressed both nationally and globally. I have been also following what it means to be a Muslim in such a politically convoluted, uncritical time and the stakes behind it, especially in India, and how the Indian academic activist space was responding to this. And it is very saddening to confess that as an aspiring academic myself, who just incidentally happens to be a Muslim herself, I realize how the project of a complete tabooization of the M word, that is the Muslim question, has been achieved both in academic and civil society spaces. This led me to thinking, what is it actually that stops critical voices who are otherwise woke and even self-proclaimed progressive political parties to engage with the Muslim question in an empathetic manner? Why is it so underexplored and misconstrued? Does that also signal that the radical democratic spirit of the critique has failed the Muslims? Is critique ineffectual or simply complicit when it comes to addressing the Muslim question as a national question? Or am I missing something here? I have been deeply perturbed by this question for a long time now, just like many of you. But I have never felt more disturbed before than what I am feeling at the current moment. And that is why, fortunately, when I started reading these two marvelous books, one is Critic Secular, and the second one is Necropolitics by Achille Mbembe, I felt there is a pattern in how the state and the non-state actors, including fellow citizens, were dealing with the Muslim minority question and why it is bereft of a sincere collective critical attention. Having read what these two books had to offer, along with a bunch of other readings that I share with you all today, kindly bear with both my ignorance and audacity, and maybe help me co-think with you all to reach to a position from where we can at least dream of a collective harmonious co-living. Because believe me, otherwise we cannot really bask in the glory of what Mbembe calls sanctuarized livings when our neighbors' houses are on fire from the river to the sea. So as you can see, I have named it like this: Emergence of an Anti-Minor Necropolitics in Contemporary India is Critic Complicit. Next slide, please. So the conceptual framework is something like this. I have drawn a lot from the book Is Critic Secular and the Asad Mahmood Butler debate, and it has helped me rethink the presumed secularity of critique. The book actually talks about that. The book is obsessed with deconstructing how the Western idea of critique is anything but secular. It has a Christian genealogy, and Asad, Mahmood, Butler, all of them constantly are talking about it. And I loved how Mahmood helped me understand the Muslim ethico-moral injury, because nowadays Muslims are constantly in a state of perpetual hurt. So how to make sense of that Muslim moral injury, ethico-moral injury, that is going to be one of my pointers of thinking. It also helped me, the book also helped me rethink the very category of religious in relation to the category of the racial. And from there I will argue how in the contemporary Indian censorship regime, post-colonial censorship regime, a trend of Islamomysia has emerged. And mind you, Islamomysia is not simply Islamophobia. Islamomysia, according to Angona P. Chatterjee and many other interlocutors, is this deep-rooted hatred of Muslims and towards Islam. So it's not only fear, it is more than fear. It is something so very lethal. It is so very damaging. It is deep rage and hatred. So I have consciously used the word Islamomysia. And I will finally argue that what should the critique do within such a Islamomysic contemporary Indian climate? Should critique be silent, or is critique anyway been rendered ineffectual and silenced, or somehow we can salvage critique, the critical spirit, and if critique can actually salvage the democratic ethos of the country? Next slide. So from Talal Asad's concepts, we understand that, as I mentioned, that critique is not secular, and there are many pluralized formations of the critique possible. And he shows how there is, Murshida also talked about it, how there is this very, there's this history of binarization where on the one hand you see Islam as fundamentalist, as parochial, as anti-reason, anti-rationality, and on the other hand there is Christianity, there is European rational thinking and free speech. So Ashad, like talks about this binary, and he basically destabilizes such a constructed binary. And he also very cleverly touches upon the idea of blasphemy and shows, he again challenges this liberal secular subject's hubris, and shows that the way the self-fashioning of the liberal subject has taken place, it is not out of blasphemy. Liberal secular subject has embraced certain forms of unfreedom. So for example, he is talking about copyright laws, he is talking about trade secrets, he is talking about many state-imposed unfreedoms that the liberal secular subject has embraced. And still it is hubristic enough to say that no, blasphemy is something which talks about the lack of free speech. So we must, as secular modern subjects, oppose blasphemy. So mind you, so definitely I'm not saying blasphemy is something that Asad is endorsing. He's not, but he's problematizing the entire commonsensical grounds of it. And finally, both Asad, Mahmood, Butler, and later in the book Necropolitics, Mbembe talks about how there is this complete sacralization of the state, and how we are okay with the category of the state being this leviathanic, megalomaniac power who has absolute monopoly over violence. And we will see what kind of havoc it creates if we do not question this uncontested monopoly, impunity over violence that states have been enjoying. And Ashad says what kind of an double standard it is. The way we are shocked at, okay, I have 5 minutes, okay. Please change the slide. And finally, through Sabah Mahmood's arguments, I will come to a point where I will try to show that through structural discrimination and anti-minoritism, Muslims are not only the religious minority in India, but they are racialized minorities. And it is interesting how we do not actually enter the Muslim question through the lens of race, because if we do that, Asad and both Mahmood and again Butler also says, if we do that, if we enter the Muslim question through the lens of race, then a lot of anti-hate speech, anti-race laws are there for the Muslims to resort to, and definitely we are very uncomfortable with that. We do not want that. We want to hyper-religionize the Muslims as if that is the only identitarian marker to understand the profile of a human being who happens to be a Muslim. Okay, next slide. I'm not going into this response thing because it is huge. So as I said, I will show the hyper-religionization of anything that is Islamic. For example, nowadays you will see how we celebrate Durga Puja, Saraswati Puja, even Halloween in so-called secular spaces as if they are not religious. But what about celebrating Nabi Divas? What about holding iftar party? If I propose to do that in my workplace, I'll be immediately called Shamprodaik, communal. So what is that double standard? What does that say about this secularized liberal subjectivity? Next, and also very important, I will argue that how the circumcised Muslim man as Katua, or the Mia Bengal origin Assamese Muslim as Mullah or Mias, these terms are used to describe Muslims, and I don't need to argue, you already know these are very racist slurs. So just because Muslims in India do not have a phenotypical, quintessential, racial, essentialist category, that does not mean they are not facing racism. It's not race that gives birth to racism, but Asad and many others argue that it's racism that might give birth to race. So that's there. Please change the slide. And these are some instances using Godi media, using popular culture, using caste, class, gender, all these agendas, how I wanted to argue, and bringing in the legal developments like NRC and CA, I wanted to argue at length how the complete marginalization of the Muslim question has shrewdly taken place gradually, structurally. Next. And as a result, definitely the demise of criticality has happened, and as a result, again, we are living with normativized majoritarianism that gives birth to a necropolitical impulse. And what is necropolitics? Next slide. According to Achille Mbembe, necropolitics is this genocidal impulse which creates relation of enmity, which gives birth to this fictionalized idea of a other enemy, and it helps the state to create certain death worlds where certain surplus populations are left to live life of living dead. So there's this in-betweenness. They're neither alive nor dead. They are pauperized. They are precaritized. Okay, and this is something which then stops the urge that both Deluge and Guthrie talks about within a democracy, that in order to avoid being fascist, there should be this affective aspiration in every human being to become minor, and I argue to become Muslim. So becoming Muslim is out of question, neither literally nor metaphorically as an ethical subject position, because the stigmatization has been complete. Next slide. These are the cases, the case of Kashmir, highly militarized, curfewed existence, the case of Manipur, which we recently saw, the vigilant violence against Muslims on a daily basis, the draconian acts like AFSPA, UAPA. What are these saying? How do they reflect on the current state of India? There is this serious genocidal necropolitical impulse that is there in front of us. And I'm not being pessimistic here, but that is the reality. Next slide. So in such a situation, stigmatization of any sort of Muslim ally has happened. So no political party wants to associate itself with the Muslim question, because then they will lose out on the non-Muslim votes, and who want that? Even definitely Kejriwal does not want that. So, okay, I'm not elaborating further. Next question. So, how to, 1 minute. So, finally, I wanted to argue within such a scenario how to talk about the Muslim question from a critical point of view. So, critique has to, but I'm actually arguing that critique has been gaslighted into thinking that if you engage with religion, there is a problem. So critique has to have that moral courage to talk about the racialized, minoritized Muslim question and still hold on to its secular ethos, and that is possible. So next slide. And I wanted to argue that how through creating safe space and brave spaces we could do that. And these are psychological concepts. If time permits later during the question answer session, I will elaborate on these things. Next. Finally, I wanted to leave with these questions that within a majoritarian censorship regime which penalizes criticality and rewards uncritical allegiance, how do we address the religion question? And as Dr. Alam Murshadaram also pointed out, can we imagine religion as critique? Not religion opposed to critique, but how to resort to those ethos in Hinduism and in Islam that will actually help us redeem the democratic spirit of the country. Thank you so much.